Hello, good evening, and welcome to Tortoise Members Open House, or as we rather grandly called it, an evening with the Tortoise co-founders. How nice. We last got together for a conversation like this in January. In the newsroom, we all had wine, we hung around, we did chats. I lovingly prepared a slide presentation of about 40 slides, of which I presented 3, and then everyone talked and I had to sulk in the corner. I've learnt my lesson, and this evening there are only 5 slides to go through, because that's how we do it these days. Our sense maker guides and thinkings, they tend to be sort of 5 kilobits of information we think is important to share. And we're joined today by our stellar invited experts. This really is what you've all been waiting for, I know. My esteemed colleagues, James Harding. Hello, James. There he is. And Katie Vanneck-Smith, who's joining us from her bedroom, which looks like a nightclub, but it is, we're assured, her bedroom. Hello, Katie, looking glamorous as ever. Thank you for being here. I'm joking a little bit, but it's important because we're a membership organisation at Tortoise, and the idea of tonight is that we share a bit about what we're up to, how it's gone, how lockdown's been, how we're doing financially, what we're doing with the journalism and what have you, and you get to ask us questions, take us to task on things we've got wrong, stuff like that. So I'm not going to prattle on too much. I'll be sort of playing the part of the puppet master as ever. Quite a lot of people have asked questions of James and Katie when they registered for the Thinking. I've got a list of those. So if I pick you out and ask you to come on and ask you a question, that'd be great. But as ever, weigh in the chat, disagree, whatever. This is a convivial, we're all amongst friends, family kind of get together that we hope will be useful and enjoyable. But let's start with James. James, so January, we talked about 3 things. We said we're going to do more audio. We said we're going to work really hard to get more diversity of voice into the journalism and into the newsroom in general. And we talked a lot about this thing called Tortoise on the Road, where we were going to get on trains and buses and go and do much more sort of out and about in the UK. I guess it would be useful to hear from you how you think it's gone, what we've delivered against, what we haven't, what we, you know, how are you feeling, James?
I'm feeling awkward. That's how I'm really feeling. The truth about these thinkings, I've got to say, is that I called Katie this afternoon. I said, what are we doing? How are we doing this? And I said, by the way, is this like it's an open house, like we do this with a glass of wine? And she's like, yeah, of course we do this with a glass of wine. It's very relaxed. Needless to say, I still get nervous enough before every single one of these that I haven't unwound enough to have a glass of wine. So I have an uptight cup of tea. There we are. So look, I'll try and do all of those things if I can, Liz, sort of like where we were in January. Part of the thing that we've done, and this is awkward for me, not just because sort of talking about ourselves feels a bit awkward, but because when I started out in a newsroom, we were always taught, you know, the story is the story, you know, the journalism or the journalists are not the story. And actually, one of the things that's been amazing for us has been, through the course of this year, realizing how much people care about the character of our newsroom, the operations of our newsroom, everything from our business to our editorial judgments to the people who work here. And so actually these open houses, the chance to talk with our members about what we're doing and what you think we're doing, really matters. And I remember the very first one we did with Katie will laugh at me now because I'm an easy weeper, but the very first one we did, there was a conversation, and someone who was a member of Tortoise said we about our newsroom, you know, how are we going to approach X? And I was just like, oh my God, we're all in it. And so let me say, it means a lot. I think there are a few things that are really easy to say. One is, it's really hard to have gone through this year without having, and living in the swim of news all the time, without having been at times really bewildered, really distressed, and finding those feelings channeled into a sense of radicalization. And I think for a lot of us in Tortoise, there's been a sense that, you know, we talked a lot about slow news or an open newsroom. I don't think we've lost or want to lose any of those things. But I think there's also a much clearer sense of quite how deeply unfair this year has been, right? How I keep on saying in the weekly editor's voicemails, it's not that it's changed things, it's just revealed them. And it's revealed inequalities, and it's revealed fault lines, and it's revealed divisions that we talked about before, and they can be the big geopolitical ones, east and west, and they can be the geographical ones within our own country, as we're seeing play out with Andy Burnham now, and they can be between young and old, black and white, lower and middle income, richer parts of our society. That these divisions feel much deeper and much nastier. But I suppose the thing that has kind of focused us, and when I think about how I sort of feel radicalized by this experience, actually it's just been about the volume of untruth. It's just been about lies and things that are not honest. And there's a job there that feels like it's a really, really important one. I'm not saying other journalists don't try and do it, other newsrooms aren't going after it, but actually trying to say, okay, let's see if we can find and understand the lie and expose it. That feels much, much more important. And I think you've seen in our journalism, or as I hope you've seen, an attempt to try and understand that. So this week, the reason we're talking about recession 2021 is there's no point pretending that we're not facing a very, very difficult economy ahead, and it's going to hurt some people really significantly, and we need to start calling that out. The reason the week before last we went after test and trace was because it's not world beating, right? It's not the best in the world. It's none of those things. And so a journalism that can take its time, that can be open to as many sources and points of view and inputs as possible, but has a purpose in what it's going for, that's, I think, been the most important for us. All of which is a very circuitous way of not answering your question. I think that the things like on the road, look, you passionately miss on the road just for the experience of getting out on the road, and we love that. The beauty of what happened to us was that in the third week of March, all of our plans for the year and a good chunk of what was coming to us commercially disappeared. And we had to transform what we did from think-ins live in our newsroom and on the road to digital. And what we found was that the road came to us, that we were much more open, that the nice thing about this is that everyone's got the same size square on the screen. Geography is not an imposition for people. And so it's felt much more democratic and much more open. That's been a big, big advantage. I'm going to stop there and hand over to Katie, because she'll have some views too. And then I can actually also read the chat and find out what actually people are really interested in. Katie. By the way, can I just point out, what is that? There's a kind of soft focus. It's sort of hazy behind you.
Oh, it's my Peloton bike.
Oh, we're learning everything now. Okay, over to you.
I'm in my bedroom.
Yeah.
I'm in my bedroom. I miss on the road, but actually what I miss more is being with all of the members physically in person. So I would echo what James said, which is it's been amazing being able to not be not be in a newsroom sort of physically, and actually be able to meet more of our members in our new virtual thing. But I have missed, and I do continue to miss, seeing members in person. The thing that, and I also miss, and I saw someone said in the chat that please stay slow. There is nothing that has felt slow about the last 7 months for any of us, I think. Even when we had that slow lockdown where we could only go on our 1 hour sort of allowed walk a day, nothing felt very slow. It all felt that we were being overwhelmed with just what was happening. So, but personally, I mean, I get to work at Tortoise, right? I get to sort of be part of the team, but actually I very quickly turned off the house party. Do you remember that first few weeks of lockdown where everybody got really overexcited about that idea that you could have a house party with your friends, and everyone did quizzes, and everyone got mad about doing family quizzes. And I really quickly was sort of said, I'm not doing any of those house parties. I think I did some in the first 2 weeks. And I think the thing that I really enjoyed, and it was my job, but actually having a Tortoise think-in of a night was like a really wonderful moment for us. And I do think this is better than on the road. I mean, nothing beats being together in person. I mean, you know, watching Liv, who is thinking, you can actually, if you look, she's waving at you on the gallery, if you're looking at gallery. Liv is is the backbone of Tortoise. She is the woman who made us go on the road and logistically organized on the road, and has been on every single one of these thinkings as thinking with her camera off. You know, this is better than on the road. I mean, it's not better than the photos that Liv sends us of the terrible places that she made all of the journalists stay in because we're a startup. The best was the Harry Potter themed bedroom that Chris Cook had to stay in whilst on a tour. I mean, none of Liv's Airbnb cost saving sort of hotels have been part of our last 7 months, but you know, the point about this versus on the road, I'd take this every day. On your question of audio and diversity, you know, we started doing podcasts at the back end of last year. We only really started, we came very late to audio. I think last time we all met, James and I had sort of wrongly assumed that there was enough audio, that podcasting was, you know, everyone was podcasting, who needs another podcast? And we were totally wrong. And we said that in January, and we've done a lot more podcasting in the interim. But what's even more exciting, and the thing I'm really pleased that we have figured out during the last 6-7 months, is that actually our file, so our weekly story, always now comes with an audio first approach. And I love that. I love that for lots of reasons. Probably like many of you on our thinking, on our lockdown walks, I listened to Tortoise a lot more. And so I took Tortoise with me wherever I went, and it was really a lovely way to walk and listen. And I actually listened to a lot of thinkings actually when I in lockdown. So when I didn't join them, you know, as a video, I would listen in, and just listening to Tortoise is for me a great way of accessing it. But it also allows us to go off platform as well. And I think Harry Moy said that in the chat that his boss said that he was really pleased that they'd done better in the R100 index, but why was it called Tortoise? And that is a big challenge for us. We are only really 2 years old, coming up for 2. And, you know, not enough people know who we are yet. So being able to take our content and use those platforms to market ourselves is really important. But actually, all of you lovely folk on here, thank you so much, because 60% of all of our members come through you directly recommending us to other people. So we don't spend any money on marketing, and very little. We do a bit of amplification, but 60% of all of our members come through people like you recommending us to their friends and family. So thank you, because so those are the things to me. And on diversity, we don't capture ethnicity of our member base as people join. Maybe we should. In the US, you're not allowed to, but in the UK, we could if we wanted to. So that's a question. And so the only way we could find out true diversity of our member base is to spend a lot of money on other people's surveys, which we don't do because we're a startup. We did do a poll quite early on, and we found that we were sort of broadly in line from an ethnicity point of view with the UK, which feels like we're not doing a great job, if I'm honest, because our newsroom was based physically in London, and actually that means that we're not really representing that community that we were in at that time. But we've done a lot better, I think, in the last 3 or 4 months around diversity of voices we've been programming. I know, Liz, you've been taking charge of that. We do a lot through the network in terms of socioeconomic and regional diversity, and that's really paid off, being able to access our member base through digital thinkings. But like many, we need to do a better job. I would be really honest on that, but we don't have enough data basically at the moment because we don't capture it on our membership going in. Liz.
Thank you very much, to both of you. There's a ton of good questions. I might go to do the slides just quickly, then it's out the way. Ian Campbell has asked, I've no idea how many members Tortoise has, so let's kind of get that bit out of the way, and then we can go back to some of the more sort of textual questions that people have about, great to do all this good journalism, but then what? So we'll come back to some of that stuff from there. But if I just talk briefly to a little sense maker guide we've had that just sort of helps you to understand who we are and who you are, I guess, as a community. Some of you might be a bit familiar with some of this stuff, and some of you it might be quite new. So we are, I think, by far the youngest newsroom in the country. About a third of Tortoise members are under 30. At one stage, when we very first finished the Kickstart, it was a slightly higher number. It was closer to 40%. And then it went down, and then it's crept back up again more recently, and that's largely because a lot of the members that we recruit through the Tortoise network that Katie was just talking about are younger, and we also have a big slug of student members as well, which tends to sort of skew things slightly younger. You can see the sort of age breakdown of active user visits there as well. Nearly half and half, male to female, 51% to 49%, so that's not bad. And we have about 1 in 4 now members have attended a think-in, attended as opposed to registered. Actually, if you look at registrations for think-ins, that number's a bit higher, obviously, because you sort of think you're going to go and then you don't quite turn up and all that kind of thing. So 1 in 4 is not bad. Again, we would like for that to be, or we'd like for it to be everybody. It never will be quite everybody, but we'd like for that to be a higher number. And it was more like sort of 11-12% before we kind of went into lockdown. But then we are still, about 20% outside the UK, but we're still very heavily UK centric. If we go to the next one, that shows where we are across the country. So just over half of us in London, and then sort of scattered around elsewhere. I noticed somebody at the very, very beginning kind of going, oh, only 3% in Scotland. Anybody that came to our Will Nicholas Sturgeon Leads Scotland to Independence think-in last week, that was 3% making their voices very clearly heard. It was as lively a chat as I think we've had since lockdown. So it is still London centric, it is in the UK, but like I say, I think what we've found with the digital think-ins in particular is that those people who have discovered Tortoise and who are using it are much more able to actively participate now than they were when they used to have to wait for me or Liv or Chris or somebody to get on a train and come to do a physical think-in in your hood. Next one, please, Tom. This is the membership growth. So sort of the brass tacks of how are we doing. So in January, we told you that we exited the end of our first full year at just less than 28,000 members. You can see that there. We're now in October, so 10 months on, and we're on about 38,500 members. These are real paid for actual money members, 15,000 of which are what we call B2C, so business to consumer. Then there's the network, which is about 18,000 people who are, their memberships are funded by partner organisations. And then the person sort of, it's free to the recipient, if you like. And then business to business memberships are sort of corporate memberships where they buy in bulk and give it to everybody in their teams, for example. So we're pretty happy with that growth. And then you'll see the other side of the slide here that starts with Slow Newsletter and then SenseMaker. One of the big changes strategically that we hadn't been doing before the lockdown was to start to build up a pipeline of trialists. We get a really, really good conversion into paying members when we find ways to bring Tortoise in front of more people. And so we have 13,000 people or so, just over now, regularly receiving the SenseMaker email, and they sort of drip through into the membership. We have just over 500 people who are in-month trialists. You can take a 28-day free trial of Tortoise if you want to. 4,000 people or so on our what we call our slow newsletter. That's once a week. It's a sort of a bit of a roundup. You don't get everything. You get Katie sort of saying hello. You might get a piece that we publish in the app. So when you add all of those things together in terms of the reach, we're at about 57,000. So we're pretty happy with that. But as I say, the main thing with this trialist stuff that you see on the side is the conversion into paying. So how many of those people dabble and then become sort of fully fledged members of the family? And that's how we're building the business. Next one, please. This one I'm particularly interested in my job as thinking editor, and it just gives you a sense of how much of a game changer the digital thinkings were. So when we closed the newsroom in sort of the second week of March, I think, and I had the horrible job of cancelling everything that we'd lined up all the way through April. We had so much exciting stuff, really horrible, painful time. And then I had about 3 days, 2 of which was a weekend, to replan, pivot and switch on a digital events program. This just gives you a sense of how many more people we've managed to reach and how many more events we've managed to do. So 75 Jan to March, 132 April to June, and then 79 July to September. And that just gives you a sense of how many people altogether have attended those and the average number of people who've come along. So we've kind of evened out. There was a period of time, particularly in May and early June was massive for us. And we did Tony Blair, and we did some thinkings that had, sort of 1,500 people in them. And the honest truth is, when you've got 1,500 people in a thinking, it's not really a thinking in a way, but huge reach. And it has evened out now. Zoom fatigue is real. But we're getting around and about 150 people a go. We would like that to be more than it is, and it's ticking up in the right way. And we're learning all the time about what works and what doesn't in terms of thinking programming. But that's sort of more or less where we are now. And then the last one, I think, is top stories. So we did 2. This isn't stories in terms of social media shares or anything. This is just members. We've asked members, what did you read and what did you particularly like? And in the sort of chunk of content April to July, it was Matt Dancona's Sick Man podcast in particular that was the standout piece of content that we did. Royal Money did very well. And then episode 2 of our Tech Nation series Inside Amazon. Chris on universities. And then interestingly, the long running series of letters from lockdown that we did over a period of time was really a sort of, it was a kind of a love letter from us to members and from members to us in many ways, was particularly enjoyed by you lot. And then in August to October, again, top of the charts was the long COVID piece that Giles led on. The infodemic, which was a kind of a fake news story. We did the RFK podcast around that. Test and Trace, which was just a couple of weeks ago, did very well, although what we see with Tortoise stories is they keep on doing well, so that it kind of builds over time. And then Slow Reviews and the Moonshot. So you can get a sense of the types of content that when we land it really lands for members, is a combination of interesting and different takes on the COVID story, soft treats, letters, slow reviews, moonshot. These are all things that you could really only imagine finding in Tortoise. And then the things like Royal Money and indeed the RFK thing, they are long running, hard won, takes ages to do it, finally pull it out of the bag investigations. So there starts to be a bit of a formula emerging of what we want to do. And that is the end of the slideshow. I hope you've all enjoyed it. Obviously, while I was talking, I couldn't keep up with the chat, so I'm going to go back to James because he's got his hand up.
I thought it'd be quite useful to talk about the things that some people are sort of asking and worrying about, and some of the things that we're asking ourselves and worrying about. I saw that Andreas and I think Ian just asked this question about impact, right? And I think it's such a good one, and it's so much on our mind. So there are a couple of different versions of that. One is this London-centric debate. I do definitely feel that digital has done a big job of breaking it out. I think that, the team of people who've built the network, Katie obviously, but Polly Curtis, the great Polly Curtis, she's taken up a new job as MD of PA. Harika, who's here, and Gajinder, the teams that really built that network mean we've changed the group of people who are part of Tortoise. I feel as though that in itself is a big step in impact. I think the thing that's really struck me about our data, particularly things like the Responsibility 100 and the AI indexes, is that we're building a products in journalism that are evergreen and that people respond to. So, we've now got over 80 of the companies in the FTSE 100 engaging, talking about their performance on that Responsibility 100 index, that's impact. But I think that what Andreas is probably talking about is a thing that I sort of, you feel in your gut, is, has the story landed? Have people sat up and realized that things they're doing are wrong and need to change it? I feel that in some ways we've done some of that in incredibly direct and powerful ways. So, we've, Jack Schenker's reporting on death at Justice and the treatment of those people who worked for the Ministry of Justice had that obvious and immediate impact, and people saw it. And it was part of a series of pieces on, unheard voices. That felt as though that's had, an impact. I think that Louise Tickle's work in talking about, social services and care of our most vulnerable children has worked. And if you were with us a week or so ago, we started looking at the question of hidden homicides, and I suspect that's going to have a real systemic impact. On some of the really big themes, what you hear is that it has impact, in that when we hold the G7 billion summit, that you hear that, we get approached by the government to say, can the Cabinet Office come along and attend? And that when we've done things we get a lot of response from, for example, the Treasury around what we've done on things on the economy. The stuff that you touched on just there, Liz, the Infodemic and RFK Jr., I think that's some of the most important work we get, because what we find is we're getting engaged by the big platforms to talk about the infodemic problem. So it's not just politicians doing U-turns in response to stories, it's the engagement of the people who've got the power to respond. My colleague Tess Murray is a sort of one-woman bellows machine on our own stories. So we really manage to make sure that they get some air and then get out and about. So we keep quite a close look at what our social media reach is, which is, we don't count here, but it's obviously, very significant, and also what our media reach is, which is also very significant, largely thanks to Tess. So I feel as though, we went live April of last year. We woke up in March and saw a pandemic that had the potential to wipe out a small startup in news, but actually reinvigorated us, remade us in terms of thinking digitally, but also I think gave us a focus. And I'm struck by Tom McCallum's points about fast and slow, particularly keeping slow. Actually, it's been very testing that to make sure that we kept slow. I think we've done that. I think that particularly if you look at Giles Whittell's SenseMaker team, it's really, really carefully ensured that it's not, lost its focus and maintained judgment on what matters each day. And in our long-term commissioning, weirdly, with so much news breaking all the time, the prize of doing long investigative work, data crunching work, original stories and files that last has been higher. And so I feel as though we've kept that, although I suppose we've just become, we've become, as I said, sort of focused on some of the things that feel more directly affecting all of us.
Don't kid yourself, you've gone slow, James Harden.
No, slow.
I mean, I think that has been, but hats off to James and Giles and the team, because it is so hard if you grow up in the DNA of a newsroom to kind of break the things that we've all grown up with. And I do think, to Tom's reminder for us to stay slow, it is something that, part of the design of Tortoise is the processes of Tortoise will help us stay slow. But it is really hard sometimes to fight our own natural instincts to jump in when we see things happening. So, I mean, I think we've done a pretty good job, James. We've done a pretty good job.
Let's talk about, I'll talk to you about some of the things that are difficult, right? If it's helpful, some things we found really difficult. One has been that in the first 3 months of the lockdown, actually, it was incredibly invigorating, the fact that we discovered we went home. Michelle Henderson, who's our COO and essentially is the person who makes sure the whole thing works, said to us on a Thursday, listen, we should have a trial working from home day and see what it's like, right? And we and we pulled in the middle of March and have not been back in many ways, at least back to that office that you all would have seen in East Castle Street. For about 3 months, it was amazing for us to discover we could make Thinkins work digitally. We could produce our journalism, John Hill and that design team, make it all work. Michael Kowalski has remade so much of our product, right? But we've not been in the same room. That first 3 months was amazing, right? The middle months of the summer, you began to feel, God, this is really tiring. And then some of the things that we came back and thought about in September are really hard. How do you do stuff creatively, which takes real collaboration, and the benefit of being in the room together is enormous. That's been a big thing. And actually, journalistically, how do you make sure that you're meeting new people, that you're in touch with new sources, you're having those casual conversations that provide, ideas. And so we just launched a couple of weeks ago, and it's really a work in progress, and it's a kind of generous 4 out of 10 at the moment, this Behind the News podcast, where we're trying to show how we develop stories, so you can listen in and hear us talk about it, pick up new story ideas, debate what works, how to approach it. So we're trying to keep that sense of openness, in fact, extend that sense of openness. But I won't hide the things that are hard going too.
James, I'm going to come to, if I can, Paul Clark, who has been a speaker on Thinkins as well as a member contributor, who has a question I think is important to talk about. Paul, are you there?
I am, yes. Hello, Liz. Hello, James. My question is really, how do you make sure that sponsored engagements don't undermine the quality and objectivity of your journalism? Because I have been, I'm a great fan of Tortoise, like everybody on here, I'm sure, but I have been to a few events that have sounded like they've turned into slight advertorials for the speakers. And I suppose I'm also totally unrelated. I'm just wondering what you can do to enforce better turn taking, because it would seem like quite a lot of the speakers never learnt it at kindergarten.
Okay. Katie, do you want to do that, or shall I have a crack at it?
Well, you talk about editorial integrity and I'll talk about teaching them manners.
Good luck with that. I think that so when we set it up, one of the things we did was we tried to express really, really clear terms, not just in the conversations we have with our partners, with the commercial partners, that Thinkins, but like on the website, on the story, are really clear, and that we are a journalistic organization. If we ever have to choose between the story and the relationship, we'll choose the story, right? And so that's clear to people. I think that we've had there have been about a handful of events, 2 or 3, where I thought, okay, this didn't work, right? And the ones that haven't worked, Paul, are the ones where we started out having a commitment where there was an organization, usually a company, that said, we're really interested in this area. And we said, we're really interested in this area. Here are the terms by which we work. We set the question, we pull together the people. You're invited on equal terms to express your point of view, but either I, as the editor, or one of my colleagues directs that conversation and asks the difficult questions. The perception problem came, I think, with a couple of companies, and it's only been a couple, and you just couldn't get anywhere with them, where often it's not actually the CEO or the kind of individual who you see on the screen, it's the kind of corporate machinery around that starts, and you can feel it 6 weeks out, starts twitching. Right? And then it gets twitchier and twitchier, and then you get on email chains with more and more people, and then they want to discuss exactly the finer points of the question and the tone, and that's ended up being a problem. And in the end, we ended up having to say we can't work like that. We can either say you're welcome to come and back our project and participate, right? Because we're not, we always say we're pro-business, we are a business, we're interested to know what businesses think. But we're not at all interested in having a crafted conversation that suits a corporate agenda. And so where it didn't work is where you started out with a big idea, and it then got whittled into something that was a corporate one, and that didn't work. And I think we've learned our lesson from that. Where it does work is saying, look, we're really interested in doing a summit on the future of education. or we're really interested in trying to think through the impacts of AI. If you're interested in that too, great. You know, we're a new business, we need to get the financial support, we'll do that. But we're going to set the agenda items for that conversation. I, as the editor and the editor's chair, or one of my colleagues, is going to drive the conversation. And the principle that we always had, which I think still holds, is we want to be a round table where anyone has a seat at the table. We want to hear people's points of view, but in the end, Tortoise pulls together its judgment and makes its own judgment on what's right or wrong. And so you have to be able to speak into the teeth of those people who are attending and sometimes sponsoring. And that can only happen if it's really a thinking, if it's really an editorial. It hasn't worked in some of those cases where it fell into, as you suggested, an interview or something. It doesn't, because even if you're as kind of sort of aggressive or as confrontational as you like, it still feels like a setup. So I think we've learned our lesson there, and that's something we change.
I also think, just to add to that, James, I also think that we, Paul, have learned a lot about what works for us and for the journalism, but also what works for partners. And I think that we've learned as we've been going on. We are still a startup, and we're sort of refining these things. And I think that to begin with, we thought we would partner with people. As James said at the beginning of the business, we're trying to build a membership organization, but to get from naught to the number of members we need to make ourselves financially viable, we have two models. We have membership and partnership, and those are our two revenue streams. And so as we grow, our partner revenues become less important. But at the beginning of lockdown and Q2, all of our partner revenues disappeared, and that was a useful thing. Mm-hmm. Actually, what was really useful about that, it was scary as hell, and like many businesses facing that abyss of kind of what are we going to do as we go in, actually it helped us sort of think through and formalize a little more about what we do with partners. And so we've come out of the last 6-7 months with a much clearer idea, as James says, both of what we do with partners in think-ins, which is a big part of where we work with partners. So we now do think-ins in public, as James said. Those are the ones that you were talking about, Paul, where we have a clearer idea of what and how we engage than we did, I think, a year ago. But we're increasingly finding that with partners now, we do think-ins for privately for them, but actually increasingly for their people. So one of the things we've learned is that this as a format works really, really well to take into people's organizations to host think-ins for them and their employees. So we're finding that actually, as we learn and we learn with our partners, the things that partners want to use us for is changing as well. And that's also helping, to your point, Paul, change the nature of those engagements. But we're also much clearer now that actually there's a lot that we do around our sense making that we now do with partners. So we have, we do sense maker newsletters for other people. We do one for Soho House, for example. But we also take the work that Alexandra does on the indexes, and we're building out dashboards for the countries that are in the AI index, for example. So that's also a new partner revenue stream we didn't have a few months ago. And finally, actually, the thing that actually we've become much better at, when we say no to partners, if we know that that's not going to be a comfortable way of working for them, right? Because actually most of this is about making sure your partners are happy with the services they're buying from you. What we actually find now is that many of our partners are better off buying our editorial services as a studio's proposition. So increasingly now, rather than do things in our world, we'll work with partners to kind of help them achieve what they want in their world, or we'll do podcasts for them, for example. So we can actually work with partners to do podcasts for them, using our editorial skills, but not using our newsroom as the place that happens. So we've got more sophisticated in how we work, but also exactly, CBR webinars are an example, Amir, of where we're working with a partner in their world. So I think, we're still learning, Paul, and as James says, adapting all the time. But fundamentally, we do think that having everyone with a seat at the table, if the people coming to the table are happy to engage on those rules, makes for a better conversation. And in terms of teaching people manners, Liz has written a lovely set of how you should behave at a think-in, and we should basically publish it at the beginning of every think-in, because sometimes people haven't read the rules, and I like a rule.
Paul,
Are you putting your hands up, James?
I am putting my hand up.
There's two people with their digital hands up.
I just want to say a couple of things. One was just to say that one of the things that's been really, really brilliant about thinking, and if you're sitting where I'm doing when you sit in the chair, is if I go off, as you know I sometimes do, at a tangent, it's really interesting. If you do that in a room full of people, you've no idea what they're thinking. If you do it on a thinking, because of the chat, you actually get steered back.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're either so often the aggrieved voice in the room that can't get heard in a physical room does get heard in the digital room.
Mm-hmm.
To give you a sense of one of the things we're working on, and it's not me that's doing the work, but your help would be greatly appreciated if you think of a way of helping us, which is we're trying to develop essentially the think-in player, right, to make the experience better than the one that we get off Zoom. So one of the things I'm really struck by is often the conversation in the chat is more substantial, forgive me for saying, than the conversation that you're hearing on the screen. Many of you may think that's the case this evening. It's also that it's also the case that you want to know often more about the people who you're meeting here, and not just us, right? And so I'm struck by, I think it's Umar's made the point in the chat, it'd be really handy to know who everyone is, particularly Tortoise people, who all the Tortoise people are. And before we finish, Liz, or maybe as we finish, I'd like to just sort of, let's go to the to that gallery view, and I'll make sure we just go through and just get a chance to say hello to everyone, because it'd be great if our members, if we were in the room together, we'd all sit around and have a drink and you get to see some of them. But I'd like to make sure that we do that before we're done.
And I've got two things I would definitely want to make sure we cover off if we can. Tim Rawlings has asked an important meaty question about bias, and then Umar had a question earlier on actually in the chat a while before. We talked about news games a little bit, but not that one, but the one about a next generation of journalistic talent and where that's going to come from. So should we try Tim first? Tim Rawlings, are you there? Tim, are you there? Maybe not. I will ask Tim's question.
Hello.
Oh, yes, you are. Hello.
Here comes Tim.
Would you mind putting your gnarly question, please, to James in case
Hello.
you're bias?
Was really.
Hiya.
Yep. Question about bias. Really, just the question about the left-right bias and how we ensure that we don't become really seen as just a spokesperson for the left wing or just for the Guardian reader. I'm really keen that Tortoise should be seen as an independent and a real in this age of difficult facts organisation.
Brilliant, thank you, Tim.
I think we think about it a lot because, frankly, if we end up being there, there's not much point in us. And I think that one of the things that you've seen is that we've organised ourselves editorially so that we're forced not to think in simple left-right terms. We're not, one of my beefs with journalism and Fleet Street, I suppose, is that sort of industrial revolution, 19th century politics has mapped itself onto the world of newspapers. We don't want to end up there. We've got to. One of the things we're trying to do in that front is take, as we did last week, an agenda that is quite obviously engaged in business, engaged in how capital allocates itself. We're clearly interested in that, so we don't end up left or right. And there's something I'm aware of, Tim, which is when you are really going to lean in to test and trace, if you are going to say, the critique we've made of the Chancellor that he shows up a week late and a pound short, there's a risk that that's seen as party political. I don't think it is. I think it's analytical. But I think that you've got to make sure that you're not doing that in the service of either partisanship or some old-fashioned ideology. I think the way that we change our politics and make clear that it's really different is actually focus around climate and planet, right? But one in a way that's really constructive. If you look at what Giles did with the moonshot team around 2030 and net zero, it wasn't sort of why journalism, and it wasn't beating up on consumerism or the corporates. It was, how are we going to transform the way the world works in 2030s, that kind of 2020s, to get to 2030. I think we can do that. I think we're seeing that in the way in which we talk about tech, we talk about the platforms and the public standard. I think we've got ideas that are fundamentally different. I think that there is clearly a big pendulum swing around, you know, either you call it liberty to dignity, or you call it, you know, the private interest versus the public good, you know, the general happiness. These ideas are at the front of our mind, but they are definitely not classic left-right, and I completely agree. One final thing to say is, I think there's a certain, there's an issue which is a lot on our minds, which is not just the diversity of the people who become Tortoise members, but in every commission we do, the stories we choose, the people who tell those stories. And that's critically important, because that will force us also to have a different worldview and a different small p politics.
Can I add something to that, which is obviously not from an editorial perspective, but I do think one of the things is when you care, and we're a caring newsroom, and when you care about outcomes, and when you're focused and you see things like inequalities, there is a danger that you can feel, to Tim's question, quite Guardian, quite BBC, because that has been the historic place that the BBC and the Guardian particularly would go to, and you would see it less in some of the other titles, but that's not true, right? And I think that if you take it away from the politics, I think that there is a sort of, when we care about the power gap and we care about what we see happening, I do think it's important that that is held centre and front and separated from politics. And if any of you are worried, I'm a card-carrying love of Maggie, so I often bring Maggie into every chat. So there is absolutely no fear about that. Kerry Thomas has just crossed his arms as I've said that, and done the thing at me that he always does when I say to everyone, I love Maggie. And secondly, I bloody love the Royals. So there's a kind of, if you've been on any of these thinkings, Al Mackenzie is covering his face. He's going, how can you bloody love the Royals? So within our own newsroom, I think it's really, really important that we do actually have that type of conversation where we're not of the same beliefs within our own newsroom. I mean, I think that is, James, you didn't say that, but I think that is an important part of making sure that, you know, as members, you can feel that we don't all feel, think and believe in the same politics and same institutions, but what we care about is building a fairer, you know, more equitable world, and we care about closing that power gap. We don't necessarily share the same politics or share the same opinions on people of the past, but we all care about the same thing. So that's my ad. I'm not a journalist, but I love Maggie and I love the Royals. I'm sorry, Anne.
Tim, one thing I should just say, and I want to say this to everyone because we could really do with your help and your input. We, as you may have seen, we announced, Giles wrote a sort of typically limpid and searing piece making the case for an inquiry, not a stuffy public inquiry that's going to run for months, but as we got to the end of 2020, an examination of the critical choices that were made in this country. And it's going to run at the end of November and the beginning of December, the 20th of November, 27th and 3rd of December. The critical thing, Tim, is, as I said, is not to be political, but to be analytical, right? To actually go through piece by piece the choices that were made around test and trace inside the NHS, on education, within Downing Street and comms. Now, obviously the focus is the behaviour of the government. We would love people to weigh in, provide, you know, anecdote to analysis as well. And we're actively seeking to partner organisations to make sure that we serve as a funnel for as much information as possible, distill it as much as possible, and then try to come up with something that at the end of the year says, A, let's just be clear what just happened, an agreement of what the facts are, and then B, some kind of framework for thinking about what happened, what went wrong, and what needs to happen in 2021.
Okay, cool, thank you. The chat is going really fast now, so I'm going to have to rush to keep up. Let's really quickly perhaps do the question from Umar on the next generation of journalists, because again, this is something that we've talked about between ourselves quite a lot. Now, Umar, I know you have a vested interest in data journalism, so I'm flagging that before you say your question, but tell us what you're thinking.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. And by the way, nice to be back for one night only. But
we missed you, Omar. Omar, stick with us.
Yeah, I think I'll stick with you. I think what I was interested in, because I'm doing a master's in data journalism at Birmingham City University, and I'm being taught by Paul Bradshaw. What I was sort of interested in is sort of the next generation. So people who are, let's say, who are not from very well off backgrounds, people who have got disabilities and other sort of social factors. Also, I was wondering how you're going to sort of bring that generation who don't really come from and get them into journalism through the Tortoise model. I'm presuming that there's going to be a model that you may create for data for sort of journalists to come up into the Tortoise ranks, if you see what I mean.
Great question, Umar. I know that Basha made a comment about the Moonshot project already, which was a sort of open invitation to members to sort of submit their ideas and get stuck in, and we produced with Giles and marshalled a lot of it through. So that's sort of one way to contribute, but there are sort of some slightly more involved long-term things too. I don't know, Katie, might you be best placed to talk about the internships and things like that?
So I love, Umar, your ambition that we would have a Tortoise way. I mean, we're going to steal that idea, and we're definitely going to think about that. I think there's lots of things that you touch on there, and I think the first thing to say is the network is at the heart of that for us in terms of bringing new voices and new people into our newsrooms. And I know I can see in the chat, and I've seen in the participants, that I can see some of our favourite faces from the network are on our thinking tonight. So it makes a big difference to us. I think what you talk about in terms of data journalism or the Tortoise way, I mean, let's get through 2021 and make sure that Tortoise is sort of on the path for long-term membership success. But I would hope that in a small way, we've been doing a little bit of that with the National Citizen Service, who are one of our connecting partners in the network, where we've been working to and other partners, so Oracy 21, Voices 21, which are where we've been working with younger people from different backgrounds to actually teach them the art of hosting a thinking. So lots more to do, and I'm sure I haven't fully answered your question around the data journalism side, because honestly, I sort of normally do this when Alexandra talks about data. So I am definitely not best placed to talk about how we take data journalism and make that a skill, because that's not my skill, but I definitely think we'll be doing more. And the network is really core to that at the moment, because we're working with lots of people to bring them into our journalism, but also to get them to host more think-ins and sort of to pay it forward in that sense. I don't know if you want to add anything more to that, James. Have you got a school planned?
No, all I'd say, Mike, is that the one of the most, so when we started this, Jimmy Wales, who founded Wikipedia, and I were talking about these things at the same time. And the thing that we've never entirely cracked, Jimmy Wales set up Wiki Tribune and we set up Tortoise, and they're both ideas around an openness of newsroom and an opportunity to participate. Giles's Moonshot was the most interesting that we've done so far, where you properly engage people, and we want to try and do more of that. But I would say we are like step 2 in a long journey to get that right. So any thoughts you've got on how to do it better, I'm all ears. Just, do email me, james@tortoisemedia.com.
Brill. There was an important question from Sally, Sally Young up there in Newcastle about sort of screen time and passing the mic and that sort of thing. It's a bit like turn taking, which I'd like to make sure we get to. And then also Gertej, hiya Sally, after Sally, because we're into the last few minutes, has an important question about global expansion, which I think is quite a good way to wind up. So Sally, go for it.
Right. So the point I made was I was fascinated to see that 49% of your members were women, which is great. But I wondered, taking away your presenters, how much screen time and questions come from women. If you actually added up all the time, So if you look at things, I'm not talking about specialist sessions, but if you actually looked across the board, was the balance of active contributors the same as your balance of members?
It is a brilliant question, and Liz called it out at the beginning of the summer. Liz, do you want to talk through what you found?
Yeah, I had 3 weeks out of the office in, I think it was June, and I had a week where I didn't watch any Thinkings at all because I just couldn't bear any more Thinkings, and then I did 2 weeks of watching all the Thinkings again, and I didn't do screen time, but I counted the number of male to female contributors, including the editor and the invited experts, but everybody who said something. And then I counted how many people had to contribute before a woman said anything, across 2 weeks worth of Thinkings, and just sort of did, like me with my pencil and with, doing my Gantt chart. And it was interesting insofar as different types of Thinkings would have a different mix. The gender of the editor would affect how soon the gender mix started. What we're able to really easily control is the programming, and I think we've got more focused on that from a gender and from ethnicity point of view and age. And weirdly, I think sometimes the hardest thing for us to program is diversity of opinion, which sort of talks to what we were saying before, getting people who'll come on and really make the unpopular case or the unfashionable case. But I think you're right in that we always have to be vigilant and probably be better at being slightly, I'm not a professional broadcaster, so I'm not like Sarah Montague, who just gets the cabinet minister to shut up when she knows she's going to go to the news. Do you know what I mean? And some of us let people run a little bit, which takes up too much time, but it's very much on the radar as something we have to always lean into every time and never relax. James has his hand up, as does Katie. Katie first, because we're talking about girls.
So Sally, news skews male as a whole industry and actually an audience. And I've worked 25 years in the commercial side of news, trying to address some of those imbalances. And I think that the big thing that we haven't touched on, but the big opportunity for Tortoise, and we haven't yet unlocked it, is that our biggest and fastest growing group of members are the 18 to 24-year-old women. 67% of our member base who are 18 to 24 are female. And what we need to do is make our newsrooms multi-generational as much as they are gender. Because I think if we start to bring out those voices, some of those younger voices, will address that balance. So one of our other issues is that we are 50-50 almost, 49% women, but we've got much younger female audience, and that's what we've got to work on, bringing those voices in as well, Sally.
Brill. Let's go to sorry.
Very quickly, the one other great thing about digital.
Apparently you're not allowed to say anything. I'm joking. Go on.
No, I was just going to say, the one of the great thing about digital, it's much easier to address these issues in the thinking. Right? You remember, in the room, in our newsroom in East Castle Street, now Berners Street, it was much, much harder. And one of the things we worried a lot about, if you've been with us in January, was groupthink in the thinking, i.e. there's a kind of majority point of view in the room, and it's very hard to speak against that. The really nice thing about this is it's much, much easier, either in the chat or in the conversation. You don't have that kind of encroaching feeling that you're going to say something that's offside with the rest of the room. So hopefully there's a lot of reason why we really can, we really can change that.
Bro, let's take one last question if we can from Gatej, because it's about sort of what next really, and where are we going and how are we going to stick around. You there? Hiya, nice to see you.
Hi, sorry, it's a bit dark.
Right.
I'm aware at the time, so it's just a real quick question about global expansion. If you're going to make an impact, then it has to be beyond obviously the UK. And I know in the early days there was lots of thoughts about the US and various other sort of places. So it is really just a question for James and Katie about what's your plans for global expansion? Where do you find those new voices? Where do you find those expertise with a view from a different place? The sort of thing that struck me historically is that there's a long conversation me and James had multiple years ago about how do you extract from the letters page experts of different views and different opinions. How do you do that globally? How do you share that? How do you change thinking at a much grander scale. So that's broadly the question, because I'm aware of time.
Thank you, Gurtej.
Shall I have a quick go? By the way,
Yeah.
let everyone know, I'm going to just say one thing. If you don't know who Gurtej Sandhu is, there are people who revolutionized the world of news, right? And Gurtej is the person who took the Times after something like 227 years in print and put it on a screen, redesigned a newspaper to live first on the iPad and then on the website. And that is been the saving of not just the Times, but probably a good deal of newspapering. You may think to yourself, that's no good deed. You should have quietly walked away and let them go away. But actually, I always find it funny because when I see you, I'm thinking, here we are again, just 10 years further on. It's a decade ago that, 10 years further on, trying to revolutionize news again. But weirdly, this is very odd. I think that we can, with the formats of Thinkins, with SenseMaker, with a lot of what we do, operate now digitally and get much better global scale. So in the next few months, we're doing a lot of work thinking about how we work with the big platforms in audio, the likes of Audible, with Spotify, etc. We're thinking a lot about, as I said to Paul, think in player growth. The thing that's really difficult, Gurtej, it's much harder, is that the pandemic, for all its global quality, has made us care much less and much less engaged with what's happening in the rest of the world. I mean, if you think about it, we've had 6 weeks now, there've only been 2 stories, COVID and Trump and COVID all the time, and so how we push to be much more engaged, and only by being more engaged in the rest of the world will the world engage with us. That's the big challenge, I think, at the moment, and it's an unlikely consequence of the pandemic, but it feels like a real one. Katie, do you want to think about that? We'll talk about the sort of the business and our global reach.
Gurtej, we always said we were going to set out to prove it in our backyard. Because we have investors who are amazingly supportive of us, but we're trying to do something a bit new and we haven't, figured it all out yet. However, to build on James's point, without us trying to be outside of our backyard, what we've seen in the last 6-7 months is now we have 20% outside of the UK, just because of the virtue of what we're doing and how we're doing it. In terms of global ambition, you've met James and I. Of course, we've got global ambition. And with that, I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I'm just going to say the ambition is there, Gurtej.
I'd expect as much.
Thank you.
Right, now, I have my colleague Liv, who is otherwise known as Thinking, is frantically trying to build a poll to see if we can, she's done it. We're going to do a Zoom poll to see how often we should do these open housey evening with the founders feedbacky type things.
Oh my God.
Can you imagine? This is what Slow News looks like. Vote now.
I like once a year. Whoever's voted for that, yes. I love you.
No, I actually said the options were monthly, every 6 months, or never again. It was awful, and she's put once a year. Never again,
never again. It's awful. Thank you, 4%.
By the way, those 4 people, just so you know, all of those 4 people work at Tortoise. Whoever they are.
Looks like twice a year is broadly the winner. How about quarterly? Okay, well, I think we've got a sense that it's definitely worth keeping in the calendar. Thank you very much, everybody. Should we do the faces thing that James
Yes.
said?
I want to do the faces thing because they're so awesomely great, the people working.
Who misses the drink-ins, the book clubs, the fun, the games, seeing people?
This is, hang on, I want to say, so there is, if you're on the first screen, I don't know how Zoom works. Is everyone on the same screen? No, we're not doing that. I want to say, there's Basher Cummings.
No, you just use the arrow, James. Go across. There are 8 slides. You can see everyone. I can see lovely Nicola. I'm waving at Nicola. I can see Chris. I can see Harry. Hello, Harry. Go and tell your boss that he needs to become a member of Tortoise. Hey, Renee in Scotland. 3%. Tell more people about us, please. I'm looking at everyone. They're all beautiful. I miss you all.
There's John Hill. Will you wave at everyone in that great orange thing? That's our great designer, John Hill. Kerry Thomas.
Hi, Edwin. Edwin's waving at us. Hello, Edwin. Oh, lovely.
Kerry's just underneath Edwin in my box. I don't know where that works. There you are. Kerry, who runs all of
Sherwood, excellent hat, excellent hat. Thank you. I love your hats. It's so much fun. This is like being on an end of week call. Lovely. It's so lovely to see everyone. Oh, they can't speak to us. It's so awful. Hi, Tabby. Welcome to your first thinking. Hopefully, they're not all like this. We don't call you out and wave at you in a weird way. Lovely to see you all. Oh, there's lovely B who was on moonshots.
Good. Well, this was good. Thank you very much, everybody. You may now go and have your dinner, have a glass of wine, have a relax. Thank you very much, James and Katie. Thank you obviously to everybody just for supporting Tortoise and sticking with us, embracing the chaos, keeping us going. It's been really nice this evening, because you're all desperate to do another one. We're talk about robots at 8 o'clock in the morning, which will be super cool. And then it's open news tomorrow lunchtime, usual gig where we take a look at what's happening in the actual live news agenda and figure out what we think about that. Thank you so much, as always. Have a lovely evening and goodbye.